All right, welcome to the Restart Podcast. My name is Joe Stasio. I'm here with Henry Stenhouse
Hello.
and Jesse Vitelli.
How's it going?
Hey, today we are talking all things Assassin's Creed Shadows, and we're going to start by asking, I think the question that most people will have, certainly it's the question that comes to mind first, is how is Assassin's Creed Shadows different from this long storied series? In what way does this entry stand out?
I think, Jesse, you're probably better placed to answer this than me if you gave Valhalla a go, because my last attempted game was Odyssey. So do you want to talk about like experience with Valhalla and what you...
I think the biggest thing is at a certain point, I think it was Origins, the Egyptian one. They sort of like moved into this open world, this sort of more RPG mechanic heavy Assassin's Creed formula. You know, they took the year off, they came back with like a new game, sort of reinvented the franchise in a lot of ways. And then I think like, with each subsequent entry, they continued to, I don't know if like iterate is the right word. They were trying a bunch of stuff. They were throwing like real mythological, like you could fight minotaurs in one of them. You could fight, I think, Anubis in the Egyptian one. Valhalla got like, the story got really revolved around like Odin and Thor, and got like almost too mythological, to the point where with Shadows they're like really reining all of that in, and they're talking, it's like way more historical focused. It's way more, they're telling a much more grounded story, a samurai story, a revenge story. Like they are, I think, trying to hone in on what makes this franchise so appealing to a lot of people. And I think it is a lot of that historical context and being able to visit these different time periods and locations. Like one of the biggest things for Assassin's Creed is always, what location are they going to next? And so I think people have really wanted feudal Japan for like a long time. They hinted at it like in the first game, and we're finally 20 something years later getting there.
It feels a lot like with this one that they've made like a conscious effort to focus on immersing players in actually being in the world as well. Like it's a lot less about sort of like systems that take you out of it. Like that was the biggest thing I noticed, was that so many of the systems that they've changed, like they changed the observation system, they changed a few other like things. It's all designed to kind of like make you more present and looking at your surroundings, rather than constantly checking your like quest log, doing these kind of things. So you sort of check your quest log and then you have a bunch of clues in most of your missions, and it's about exploring the world rather than ticking off stuff on your log.
Right. There's definitely a reputation for the series, and I guess the publisher's game is, as a whole, that there's quite a bit of checking icons on a map and maybe looking at your mini map as opposed to really soaking in the surroundings. So it sounds like you're saying they've had some strides there, which sounds really
I mean, I haven't played loads of the series prior to this. I was really interested to see if this one would click with me. But what kind of caught me off guard was that like in each zone, there's not a huge amount of like stuff thrown into every small area, which like, I mean, it sounds like a bad thing, but having played like older Ubisoft games like Far Cry ones where the map is just smothered in collectibles and that kind of thing, I really liked it because it means you're sort of just left alone to wander the environment and really appreciate the design that's gone into the cities and the streets. Like on a merchant street, maybe only one of the vendors you can actually interact with, but there are still all the people on all the other stalls who are like selling different wares that aren't relevant to you as the player, but it makes the world actually feel alive and in a way that's like not, it didn't feel overwhelming to me, which was a plus.
Yeah,
Nice.
I found it really interesting that as I finished the game now and I'm kind of going back to do some cleanup, there's a lot of empty space in this game in really interesting ways, where you sort of look over like a mountaintop and you see these big rolling hills everywhere. And there's got to be stuff there. And you go there and there's not really anything. And to Henry's point, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just I was really surprised by it. They crafted this one area to be something to look at in the distance and be like, wow, that's beautiful. They really like made this scenery all come alive. But also sometimes they're just used for one small moment in a side quest and then never revisited again. And it's kind of nice to have these like bespoke pieces of the map that, as opposed to just being, oh, you're going to find a treasure chest here and you're going to find a collectible and you're going to find this other thing and there's a tower over here. It gives the setting room to breathe in a way that I appreciate.
Yeah, they do have like repeatable, like there's a lot of repeatable activities that you can do around the world. Like the temples and shrines are the things that I think you come across the most, and they're very tied to Japan, where like at some shrines you'll be asked to, like an activity you can do is pray at certain stations around the shrine. And at some temples, you can like recover lost pages that are hidden in places so you can parkour up. But it's never that many. It's like 2 or 3. And then even then, not every shrine has it. So like there'll be shrines in the games that you don't even go to as part of a quest, but you can just go in there to appreciate the fact that they've made this incredible like reconstruction of one that's unique and different to all of the others. And I guess it's like how much love you have for that level of world crafting is whether or not you'll enjoy that or find it empty.
I can't speak for everyone, but that sounds appealing to me. It's almost the Breath of the Wild approach of the less is more. The negative space is really powerful, famously in that game. So I like the sound of that. That's really cool to hear. How about let's move on to, I think this is a staple in a few of the more recent entries, but you guys tell me. There's a dual protagonist system, and I know that there's story implications surrounding the system. Could you talk a little bit about how it works and what players can expect?
So in this game specifically, you're dealing with Naue, who is your shinobi, your ninja, and then you have Yasuke, your samurai. And it's interesting because I think they both represent 2 different parts of Assassin's Creed, and sort of what I was talking about earlier with sort of the reinvention of Assassin's Creed over the years. Yasuke kind of symbolizes what modern Assassin's Creed games have been, sort of the more action focused, the more RPG ability usage. Like you're kind of just going in and you can do some stealth, but you're mostly sort of just there to hit stuff. And now it is very old school Assassin's Creed with modern trappings around it, but very much you're going to sneak around, you're going to use the hidden blade, you're going to assassinate, you're going to, sometimes crawl on ceilings, which is a thing I learned I could do like 40 hours into the game. There's a lot of more stealth with Naue, and their stories do come together at a certain point. They feel very disparate for a while, and then when they finally come to a head and you're like, oh, I understand why these 2 characters are together and the sort of the role that they play in the grander narrative, as opposed to older Assassin's Creed games where it was more of you're going to pick this character or this character, and in some of the cases that character is going to show up as an antagonist or another person in the story. Whereas this game is you are playing as both of these as much or as little as you want, depending on what you're doing in the story. And you can really kind of make them your own in a lot of ways.
And I feel like something that people who haven't like looked into too much of the game or had a chance to go hands-on with it before might be surprised by is just how like different they are in terms of their competence in fighting. Like Naue can only take a few hits before she dies from most enemies, unless you're fighting people who are particularly low level or weak. She'll get cut down and she can't block. She can only parry and dodge. Whereas Yasuke, he can stand there and like tank hits from everything but like the most powerful enemy. A lot of his toolkit is built around blocking and then counter-attacking, that kind of thing. He's made to fight people. Like you want to go in, like you can literally walk up to the gates of an enemy area, challenge the first person you see and like impale them and then fight everyone else head on. You still have to be smart and decent at like parrying, like using your surroundings. But if you try and do that with Naue, there's a good chance that you're just going to get smacked down in like no time at all. And at first, I don't know if you found this the same, Jesse, but I found that it meant Yasuke was like the easy option. He felt like the easy option. But the more I played the game, the more I kind of realized that Naue just isn't really meant to fight. Like her whole thing is not sticking around. Like if you mess up with her, you get stuck in a fight. It can be a little bit like frustrating, but you can just run away and escape. Like she's got all the kits. You unlock smoke bombs with her. You can drop that and just get out of there or reposition. So at first, like as someone who played a lot of games like Sekiro, Dark Souls and that, I was just trying to parry everything. It would be like, okay, I'm fighting an enemy, I'll sit there and parry. And after a long while, I was like, wait a minute, I should be like escaping these guys, getting back into a hidden position and just relying on her assassinates and tools like that, unless I'm playing as Yasuke.
Yeah, there's definitely a sequence pretty late in the game that I was doing for one of the, 12 assassination targets that you kind of go on throughout your journey. And it was this one enemy camp and there was a bunch of like elite and guardians, which if the bell rings at a base and enemies get summoned, you get alerted, some really hard hitting enemies will show up. And there's just this loop that I was doing where I would like climb up in a building, climb out of a window, assassinate somebody, get seen, run back into the building, climb up on the roof, wait to be hidden again, assassinate. And I just did this loop for like 20 minutes with just everyone. And it was just that the moment where it clicked with me. This is the most efficient way to handle this, because if I tried to fight everybody as Naue in this situation, I would just die repeatedly because there are too many enemies. I'm not using the tools at my disposal. I'm not using what Naue is good at, what her strengths are. So it just becomes this game of hide, do an assassination, run around, get out of dodge, maybe assassinate somebody else. Because specifically for this, I had to clear the camp, so it was like that was my only option. But that was more efficient than trying to just brute force my way through it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, a lot of the time in most missions, now he doesn't really have to fight most
Yeah.
enemies. Like, you don't have to clear everyone. A lot of the time, you can just sneak past and get to the objective. Or like sometimes it'll be like going through a castle, and Yasuke will literally have to go in the bottom door, fight through like floors of enemies to get to the top. Now he can just sneak around the outside, grapple hook up the side of the building, and get in through a window and save half the time. And the bits where like the dual thing really worked for me was, and I don't interested to hear if you felt the same, Jesse, but it was the main missions where you're allowed to swap between them on the regular. Like whenever you're doing a sort of main mission for these like core targets, you'll get prompted at several stages to pick which character you want to play as, and you're not locked for the whole mission. It will change again after an instance. And that really gave it a chance to sort of, based on the information you've heard, you can pick which one you think will fit what's coming next. And if it goes wrong, it'll get you back to that loading screen and you can swap and try the other one. And I really liked that aspect of the game.
Yeah, it's nice because the game never felt like it forced you to play one character for too long. Outside of the beginning of the game, which the sort of the opening few hours, you're kind of locked into Naue for a bit before Yasuke shows up. But once the game opens up, once you have both of them, the game, even like Henry said, within missions, doesn't keep you playing as one character too long. So you can just really play the character you want to play or swap between them if you like both of them.
The only thing I found a slight downside with like the dual character thing is that when you're out in the world, to me, Naue just became the default because she's
Naue is the
capable of
default,
parkour.
yes.
Yeah, like she can parkour, she can climb things, and a lot of the like fast travel points, you can unlock ones that you pay for, but a lot of the other fast travel points are like their viewpoints, like classic things from the Assassin's Creed series where you climb up somewhere really high and you get a view of the surrounding environment. But often Yasuke either can't get to them or it will take you ages to get up there with him. So it just meant that like I defaulted to Naue, and it felt a bit unfair on Yasuke in that sense that like he gets left behind a bit in the open world exploration.
There's no downside to having Naue be the person that runs around the world, but there's a huge downside to Yasuke. Like you just can't get to half of the stuff you want to get to. And I feel like there could have been a better balance there because, like, sure, Yasuke could like walk into a camp and just completely decimate them. But when you're just exploring the open world, it's just not worth it to have Yasuke on you. And you could switch pretty quickly between the two. Like, you just open up a menu, hit a button, like you're good. But yeah, as somebody who's like currently doing late game cleanup, I've just been running around as Naue. And if I want to go take on a fort or a castle, I just switch to Yasuke. Yasuke does what Yasuke does, and then I go back to Naue. So I've spent the majority of this game as Naue.
So it doesn't sound quite as cut and dry as easy mode, hard mode, but it's like the price you pay for quote unquote easy mode is time. You know, one thing I felt playing Rise of the Ronin a couple months back, which also has a hot swap mechanic, and you're going between two protagonists, is that they didn't feel different enough, which is obviously not what you're describing here. And so I had trouble building muscle memory with each character's kit. But do you find that once you see that you're controlling Naue, your mind kind of clicks and you know all of the the necessary maneuvers you have to do to be effective there, or do you find yourself butting heads with the Yasuke muscle memory? Does that question make sense?
So something that's really funny about this question is so. They both play like what's the word I'm looking for? Button wise, they're the same. Like they can do the same things. But something really funny that happened to me was I found a late game piece of armor for Yasuke that lets me parry unblockable attacks.
Yes.
And I never took it off. But every time I would switch to Naue, I would forget that I couldn't block unblockable attacks. So I would just get decimated. Because my muscle memory was parry. I no longer need to dodge. I can parry every single thing. And then I'd play as Naue, and I'd get decimated every time.
Yes, that was exactly what I did. And I like through to the end of the game, I kept that armor because I mean the ability to parry like the heavy attacks that are unblockable or whatever, it's incredible. Like it's one of the best
piece
powers
of armor.
Yeah, I had the same thing. On that note, I feel like in general, like you said, Jesse, the characters control almost identically. But I had a few stumbling blocks just in terms of the weapons on that same regard. So rather than the characters being the things that control differently, it's the weapons each one of them have. And they each have 3 weapons, and each weapon has its own skill tree that you put points into, and those skill trees unlock unique like inputs that you're going to do. It's nothing like crazy Tekken combos. Like I think Yasuke has his Naginata has one like lengthy combo that you need to remember, but it's the little things. So like with I'm trying to think, like Yasuke with his katana has an unlock where if you block an attack and you release block right after an enemy hits you, he will counter automatically. But he doesn't do that if you're using his club, the Kambo club, or you're using the Naginata. And I would forget stuff like that quite a lot because the way I enjoyed the game was to swap weapons constantly and like make the most of all of the kit. So it has a little bit of that, but not between the characters, or at least I didn't find that.
Oh, that's interesting that you were swapping weapons a lot, because I'm the kind of person that once I find something that works, I will use it until it no longer works. And so I ran that entire game with Katana and Naginata, and that was it. Like I cleared that entire game with those 2 weapons, and I never even looked at the other ones. I think I tried the Teppo like once, and I'm like, no, I got big stick with blade and sword. Like I don't need anything else.
Which was your favorite though?
Oh, the Naginata. Like
Same.
that was easily, because you eventually get a skill where it's, if you hit them with like the tip of the blade, it does more damage. And so I would just constantly do the crescent slash where you swirl around and sort of hit a big group of enemies. And then if you had something like poison or bleed or any sort of additional affliction, you would just clear out waves of enemies. You were almost playing Dynasty Warriors or some sort of Muso game at that point, because there's one point where there was 10, 15 enemies in front of me, and I'm just clearing them out left and right with this blade, and I never looked back.
I think a good way to think of the abilities, like in this game, is that most of them seem to be there for fun. Like they don't make the combat. The combat isn't balanced. If you just parried and you just blocked, you might struggle. But like in boss fights, if you use your full suite of abilities that you can activate with like the adrenaline bar and you've engraved your armor, you probably won't struggle unless you're bumping up the difficulty. Like against most bosses with Yasuke, his Naginata has like an impale attack where he can jab someone and then charge them forwards. And if you slam them into a wall, they fall on the floor, and then you can do like a really high damage down like on the ground attack. I think they're just called ground attacks. But stuff like that kind of makes like the toughest fights relatively trivial as Yasuke, but I still enjoyed it because the animations on them and like the effects is really fun to do. Like clearing whole camps with the crescent slash is great.
There's this black and white effect that happens when you do some of the attacks where the blood will still be red, but the actual everything else will go black and white. So there's this really nice animation that happens. There's a katana move that Yasuke has that I use throughout the entire game, where you sort of just stab them in the neck and then like chop them on the back of the head, and eventually you get a skill that gives you health back every time you do that. So it was just this easy way to just keep healing, was just because Yasuke will have 5, 6 adrenaline points, which is what you spend to use the abilities that you get through the skill tree. And you can just, that cooldown is not that long. So I'd hit, do the ability, hit, do the ability. And I was never wanting for health as Yasuke. One thing that is kind of a bummer with Naoe specifically is you eventually get an ability to dual assassinate. So when you're perched up above somebody, you jump down and assassinate them. But if you have the Tanto equipped, which is one of Naoe's other weapon types, you can double assassinate somebody like that. So it kind of pigeonholes Naoe into always having to have the Tanto as her secondary weapon, because that double assassination is so useful and so powerful that I often found myself, I'd have a different secondary weapon. I'd perch myself up on a roof, see I could do a double assassination, switch to a Tanto in my inventory, and then do the double assassination, and then take the Tanto off again. And I was like, there's got to be a more elegant solution to this.
I'm guessing that they did that because Naoe doesn't have ranged options in the way that Yasuke does. So like Yasuke has access to the bow and the gun, the Teppo, but Naoe doesn't have those. So I'm guessing their logic was like, oh, the Tanto will probably be your secondary, but it's still like, why shouldn't you be able to run Katana and Kusarigama as your like dual setup? And like you can have loadouts, so you can set up 2 loadouts, but that gets a little fiddly because you have to update all of your armor and everything on multiple loadouts, which is a little bit of a pain. It wasn't a problem for me because the Tanto was like my favorite weapon by far. Like when Naoe's using that, she's just dancing around people and jabbing them from every angle. It's really fun. But yeah, if you're not using it, it's going to be a pain to take advantage of all of our kit.
All right, talk to me about setting. Like we started with on this podcast, the fans were desperate for this kind of setting. And so now that you've spent so much time with it, and I want to hear both of you how long you have spent with it. I forgot to ask you that. How does the setting come to life? Is it beautiful? Do you feel transported? Is there a variety in the setting? Talk to me about that.
I have never seen so much foliage in a video game before. And I know that sounds really silly, but this game is so visually dense in a way that I don't think I've ever experienced in a game before. And I'm not trying to be like hyperbolic, but there are moments that this game looks absolutely gorgeous. When you're cresting a hill and you're seeing the breadth of what this game offers you in terms of vegetation, like animals, everything. This game can look really, really, really pretty. Something that kind of bugs me about this game, and it's partly because of the setting, is this game is very flat vertically.
Mhm.
There's not a ton to climb, so you are sort of traveling by horse a lot and sort of dealing with a very horizontal landscape. And the verticality comes from a lot of the mountaintops and a lot of the sort of hills of the region, which are great. But kind of what we mentioned earlier was that there's a lot of empty space in this game. So sometimes you're trying to just get somewhere and you're either going up a hill or down a hill, and there's so much shrubbery in your face that you can't see anything. You're just being batted by tree branches, your horse is getting stuck somewhere. Like, the setting is beautiful, I think, when you are just pulling back and enjoying the views. I think sometimes when you're playing the video game, it leaves a little to be desired. Not a ton, just like a little bit more.
I loved it personally. Like Jesse said, there's bits in this game where I was just like, and I feel like we say this with so many AAA games that come out, but it genuinely shocked me with how pretty some of the scenes are. And it did it in a way that I really appreciated for an open world, which is that they feel unique to that area. So like I can remember exploring around Lake Omi, like the castle that overlooks it from the south side. Azuchi Castle's a big one, but it's like there are distinct areas that feel unique. So it's not just everything is smothered with like leaves blowing everywhere and that kind of thing. There are differences to the different zones, but you're right that it is like hubs of area, isn't it? If you try and go off the path, Assassin's Creed Shadows doesn't want you to do that. Like if you are on a road and you're like, oh, I'm going to shortcut across this mountain, you're basically just going to be staring at a screen of like green leaves for about 20 minutes while you press the like vault button, hoping that you get somewhere. You're meant to travel by the roads, and like as long as you, I guess, go into it with that in mind, you'll probably be okay and you'll have a great time. But in terms of like the realization of it, I think it definitely delivers on the thing that most people have probably been looking for, of like, I want to go into feudal Japan and I want to be able to move around. Like, it's so beautiful, but it's beautiful in multiple ways, in that like you can revisit the same area in different seasons and it will look fundamentally different. Like the difference between summer and winter is huge. Like I went to Hidaiji Temple, was like a very big temple that's still there in Nara today, and when I went there, it was snowy and foggy everywhere. So it looked really creepy, actually. Like there are like trees with no leaves outside, and it was like this haunted place almost. But if you go there in summer, it'll be completely different vibe. Like it builds those sort of memories that feel a lot like if you're actually traveling yourself, like if you went there on holiday. So it builds that kind of memories. I don't know if you found that, Jesse. Was that kind of similar?
Yeah, so I've never been to Japan. So a lot of this is sort of just, oh, I've read, I've seen pictures, I've I have an understanding of a lot of these areas and places, and where they are regionally. But I did want to touch on the weather point real quick, because I do think that the weather system, it was something they were touting pre-release, was, oh, we've got these storms that'll really change the feel and how you approach situations. And I'm like, we've heard this before. I don't know if I'm gonna buy into this, but I was actually pleasantly surprised with how good the weather tech is in this game. Snow, particularly when there's a blizzard, it's a whiteout. You can't see anything. You could barely see 2 feet in front of you. And I was just, anytime I'd be on my horse and a thunderstorm would roll in and I'd see lightning crackle in the distance, I one of those moments again where it's wow, this game can be really beautiful sometimes, even in the midst of a rainstorm, even in the midst of a blizzard. This game is just kind of constantly introducing moments that create the perfect photo mode moment, the perfect, oh, I want to take a screenshot of that. I want to remember this. I want to record this clip. This game can look beautiful. And a lot of that is due to the setting and the weather and everything and how it all combines essentially.
It's like one of the few Jesse, I'm glad you mentioned rainstorms, because I was like, I don't think I've played another video game where seeing like my character's clothes like whipped by like rains that
Yeah.
are coming in almost horizontal made me think like it almost makes you feel cold, because I was like, oh, I want to be inside. Like this, it's beautiful, but it's horrible at the same time. And I haven't played another game that gets that experience of like being caught out in the rain.
Yeah. There's this moment of, in a lot of games, right, weather is sort of a set piece moment. It's something that comes along when, oh, we got to get back to camp. The storm's rolling in. Like it's a very scripted moment. And the thing I appreciate about Shadows is that a lot of these moments aren't scripted. Like there was a moment the other night where I'm riding on my horse and I'm kind of in an uncharted territory. I haven't been in this area yet. I don't really know what's going on. And I could start to see the wind pick up and the clouds become gray. And as the player, I was, oh, a storm is about to roll in. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't mean a lot for what I'm doing right now. It doesn't change anything. But it started making me feel like, what would I do in this situation? I would have to find shelter. I would have to go somewhere. What did these people do when this would happen? They're just, oh, hopefully I could stay in a nearby town or I could find some shelter later. And it just got me thinking a lot about stuff like that that normally games don't, because like the weather is always tied up in a big set piece moment, where this was just, I was just exploring and I noticed that it was going to start raining soon, and it, you know, inspired me.
That's a pretty zoomed out view of the settings. Is there like a standout location or dungeon or castle that comes to mind as sort of the most interesting place you visited?
Yeah, I mean, I can go first on that because I mentioned it earlier, but I loved the area around Lake Omi. It's a big area. Omi is one of the main, like the regions. Like I can't remember how many there are exactly. Like is it 12 or 8 or something like that? But it's just a very elongated section on the map where the center of it is just a giant lake, and all of the spots that you go to are just cities that are dotted around the edge of this lake. And it means anytime you travel between them before you unlock fast travel points, you're just looking out over this beautiful lake as you're going, and I really liked that. And it's got Azuchi Castle is like a castle that was famously destroyed, I believe, in Japan. So you can go visit the ruins today, but they've rebuilt it, presumably based on the plans of like the actual castle, and it's sort of like towers. It's this huge like up the side of a like mountain ridge over this lake, and you can sit on it and look over the scenery, and it's really like beautiful. You get this like low-lying fog, so that for me was like my favorite area.
Yeah, for me, Henry, I don't know if you've gotten there yet, because it's one of those areas that the game doesn't really take you to unless you're really going off the beaten path. But I think it's the Utah fishing village.
Oh,
Um,
which do you know which region that's in?
Tanba.
Tamba's like, yeah, like you said, the main story doesn't take you everywhere. I haven't even been there. Like,
Yeah.
that's the one region I have not set foot in. Yeah.
So if you go very north, basically to where the ocean is, to the coast, there's a couple of fishing villages sort of dotted around, and it's really just, it's just a good vibe. Two, because it's ocean water, it's different from the lake water. Like it color wise, just it's making waves. You're seeing boats in the distance, sort of rocking. It's just like a really nice. The first time I rolled up there, I was just sort of exploring, and there's a big path that leads you right up to it, and you can see all the ships like near the harbor, and it's a mixture of trade ships and warships and a bunch of stuff going on. And it's just it's the first time I felt in that game. Maybe not the first time, but one of the most I felt of just wanting to just hang out. I wish fishing was in the game. That was the moment I was like, I wish I could just be fishing. I just want to stand here with all the fishermen and just be catching fish all day.
Sure.
It's just really, really beautiful.
So yeah, that brings to mind the side quests, side activities. Like what propelled you to go there, and how does Assassin's Creed Shadows reward the players for, going off script a little bit?
What I will say is, specifically for me, it's just nature of the work I'm doing on the game for the site. But I did go there because there was a question mark icon which is just undiscovered location that you get from climbing up on the viewpoints, the towers, and you'll get a bunch of question marks. So you're always told like, we won't tell you what's over there, but something worth seeking out is over there, which is
Right.
always just enough of a breadcrumb to be like, okay, well, I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go see what it is, even if it's nothing major. It's another thing off the map. But something for me that drives me as a player is anytime your map is blank and it fills in by you just going there, like clearing the fog of war sort of deal. And Assassin's Creed loves to do that, Shadows, where you're just walking and it's filling in the topography and all the foliage on the map. And so I could see the little pathways and they intersect. And I look at the map and I see, oh, there's another path over here I didn't go. So then I'll go back and I'll go through it. And that's usually breadcrumbed out through the question marks. And then the other side content, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There was an area earlier that I was talking about that seemed, oh, there's all this empty space. There's not a lot going on. And then I ended up looping back around to that area through a side quest way later that was clearly just meant for this one side quest, this little bespoke area that they crafted. And it was really cool. It made me want to go seek out other side quests so I could be like, oh, this is going to take me to all these points of the map that I thought were empty because they didn't have anything. They were just a bunch of trees or a little cave with nothing in it. But some of these side quests are going to take you there. And so I think that's also a really good way to breadcrumb out how to get around the map through side quests.
Yeah, so it's kind of like it feels like the quests are the excuse to go explore. Like
Yeah.
I don't particularly. There's only a handful of them. I'd say that I really remember what the like purpose was of the little side quests. There's some quite funny ones that are memorable, but a lot of the time it's pretty much an excuse to go and get you doing something in a new area, and that's your impetus. Like if you just went off and explored, the side quests that you'd find along the way would be good, but like you might find that you're just exploring for the sake of looking at the environment. But
Sure.
like Jesse said, a lot of the places are just, it's so nice to find an area and be like, oh, this really feels handcrafted, like and I might have not seen it. Like a lot of the stuff you're describing, I haven't even been there, and I've beaten the main story of the game.
It's interesting because I think I'm doing the game backwards, where I'm exploring without doing the quest lines. So I'm finding some of these areas before the game wants me to find those areas, if that makes sense. And so I think I'm finding some cool areas and being like, there's nothing here. What's going on? This area seems like something would be here. And then I'll play a side quest and it'll bring me there. And I went, oh, because I'm just roaming the map without doing anything, I'm finding all of these areas with zero context. And then once the context is added, it's oh, actually, this area is sick. I love this place. I never want to leave. Or sometimes I do, depending on the quest.
You'd recommend people don't do that sort of freeform exploration, like go to places when quests pick them up, encourage you to?
I think I would. It's not that I would encourage people to not do that. I think I would encourage people to not judge so quickly if you go to an area and there's not something there, because there's a good chance that a side quest will bring you back to that area, especially if it feels important. If you go to an island and there's nothing on the island, but there's like cool rock formations and you could kind of maybe tell that a battle would take place here, just kind of put in the back of your head that you'll probably be back here when something of importance happens. Just keep an open mind, I guess, is what I would say about if you find an area with nothing in it, good chance that a side quest will bring you back there.
Does the game justify the open world, in your opinion?
The game doesn't feel overstuffed. And I think that's Henry was kind of making that point earlier. There's not a massive amount of collectibles. So I think the game uses the space wisely, as opposed to just saying, we have big game, we have a lot of stuff, we are going to make every single inch of this game have stuff. And I think a lot of those games just are open world for the sake of being open world. This game feels like it utilizes its space properly.
I remember back when Dragon Age Inquisition launched, and there was this whole thing about like the people would just get stuck in the first open world area of the game.
Yeah.
And then they would never leave it because there's stuff to do. There's like constantly things to do there. And people would stay in there for like 10 hours and then be like, why am I having a terrible time? Shadows feels like it really doesn't want you to do that. Like it has these gorgeous environments, but it will just be like, here's a couple of quests to do in it. And there's maybe a few collectibles. And then go explore somewhere else. Maybe you'll come back here on a side quest. And I really like that because it stops you from like the first area. It stops you from getting exhausted. The first area that you're let loose into, Izumi Setsu, is big. Like it's not a small place, but you're not encouraged to like sit there for, like 20 hours just ticking off things in that one area so that when you get to the next one, you're like, oh, I've already done this like a million times. It's like you do a couple of temples and then you go off to somewhere else. And for me, that works. Like I much prefer that to being overwhelmed with a million things. So yeah, I feel like it does justify the open world, but that's not to say there aren't like snags based on the formula that it's bringing in. Like Jesse and I have talked about this before, but there are some like weird systems. Like Assassin's Creed wants to sell you on this historical drama, but there's a few things like you can't attack civilians. If you attack too many civilians, you'll get desynchronized because it doesn't want you to like kill random people on the street, and it doesn't really make sense. But when you're in like a hostile environment, and a lot of these hostile environments are places you can just go into to basically rob, there'll be like level 1 servants who just walk around carrying lamps or like tidying the fields. You can murder those and there's no repercussion for it like whatsoever. Like you even get it, I don't know if you do, but maybe you get a tiny bit of XP for it, and it just feels like stuff like that are where you're like, oh, I feel like I'm seeing the cracks a little bit, but I don't know if that's avoidable.
You're also almost incentivized to kill them, the servants, because they will run and alert guards that like somebody has broken in, and the game will put sometimes a big exclamation point above them as they run away, like, hey, go do something about this. And your options are generally kill, throw a shuriken or a kunai at them. Like you don't have a lot of non-lethal options. You can grab them, but it is not the first prompt that comes up. Like the first prompt that comes up is assassinate. And it's like I don't know, guys. I don't know if this was the move. I don't know if this is the right thing.
Especially when the storyline it's so focused on them being like, we're doing this for the people. Like that's our goal, is our driving motivation.
Yeah.
There's a few things like that where you're just like, yeah, that feels a little weird.
The shrines, you get the first time you visit a shrine, you get a notification that's like, hey, please don't climb on the shrines, be respectful. Yeah, the Torii gates. And then as far as I can tell, there's no actual repercussion for climbing on them. Because I accidentally grapple hooked on one and climbed up it and didn't realize it was a Torii gate. And then I was standing on top of it and nothing happened.
I feel like that message, I guess, is effective in that way. It's like, even though the game doesn't do anything, I avoided doing it the entire game because I was like, oh no, something bad will happen if I do this.
Yeah.
Like, I guess they could have like sicked the Guardians on you if you do, but it's a nice way of preserving respect for them. But why not just not make them climbable?
That's what I'm saying. It's these weird little things where it's like, well, it's Assassin's Creed and it has to be climbable. But sorry, side tangent here. Not everything in this game is climbable, and I don't hate that. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do think it's incredibly frustrating that you can't always tell what is and isn't climbable, especially rock faces. Like when you're on the side of a cliff, it's anyone's guess if this rock is climbable or not. Sometimes the game will just you'll run up and then you'll fall back down, or you'll slide down, or you'll grab onto one part of the rock, but then you try to leap up and you can't climb onto the other part of the rock. And it's very hit or miss on what can and cannot be climbable when you're in nature. Building wise, everything's pretty much climbable. But
think the exact same, and I understand why they've done it, because they don't want you in a lot of the castles to be able to just like, I'm just going to swim up to this side of the fort moat and just climb up the walls, and it means you have to sort of go on a slightly more like guided path through these environments, which is good. But yeah, when you're out in the world and you're trying to just get up a cliff face, sometimes it's like, why can I grab onto this but I can't grab onto that? And it can get a little irritating.
There's one particular moment, pretty like epilogue end of game stuff. No spoilers here, but there's a moment where the game wants you to go to a very specific place. And I went there on my horse and I used the Pathfinder, which is a tool that gives you a guided line on how to get there. And it brings me to the location, and then the Pathfinder thing just goes straight up into the sky, which is useless to me. But I see a waterfall and I see a bunch of rocks. So I go, this must be the game just telling me climb. Just climb up can't climb up the waterfall. Slide down the rock. I go, okay, maybe I need to walk around. This entire thing is walled off by like 20-foot high rocks. And the game doesn't tell you explicitly this, but there's a path like 200 feet off of the trail that lets you into that spot. But Pathfinder doesn't bring it to you. It just tells you to go up. And there's no way to climb it otherwise. So I spent probably a good hour trying to figure out how to get into this location
because both the tool that's supposed to tell me how to get there and the climbing did not align with one another. And so I'm just looking at this line going straight up in the sky. Like, I don't know what you want me to do.
This is sounding like a skill issue to me. You shouldn't be using the Pathfinder tool.
Henry, if you come across this, you'll understand. You'll understand.
One thing we didn't talk a ton about so far, and I want to make sure we hit, we're getting towards the end of this episode, but how does the story land with you? And Henry, did you finish the game?
Yeah. Well,
okay, so
I should clarify this. There's loads of side stuff to do in this game.
Sure,
I finished
sure.
the main objective.
Okay, that's relevant. Relevant.
It's
to
more
the question.
complicated than it needs to be for some reason, in terms of how this game segments its stuff.
Understood. So in terms of the story, and let's just say the main campaign, how was playing it? How was the journey? But then how does it wrap up? And do you feel satisfied?
I want to go back, which I think is indicative of it being a good time. Like, there are a lot of little side narratives that I'm like, oh, I really want to go back and spend some time doing that, like explore the other regions. So that's a sign that like none of the story stuff hit badly for me. But what I will say is, you are not going to like this game if you don't like listening to people talk. There is so much dialogue in Assassin's Creed Shadows, and a lot of it is to do with different factions, political maneuvering relevant to each other in the areas that you go into. And if you're someone who's like going to be looking at your phone during that, I've got news for you. Assassin's Creed Shadows will occasionally test that you have been paying attention. Like, every so often, you'll be like in a lengthy series of conversation. There'll be characters talking about either some important war or like maneuver, and then they'll like turn to your character and be like, so what do you think we should do about this? And you can look at like conversation logs, but you can't do that if you've left a conversation, done a bit of a quest, and come back. So there were some times where like I wasn't paying full attention. I would go and do part of a quest, come back, and a character would be like, right, so what do you think about this person, or something like that? And I'd just be like, oh no, I wasn't paying enough attention here. Or occasionally it's literally tied into the stories. Like, a few of the assassination missions, you have to learn certain skills. Like, a very early one encourages you to learn how to approach a tea ceremony. And you have to like remember the different actions that you're supposed to do in order to keep Naoe's cover when she's in a scene. And it's not like most games where it'll just get you to do the learning and then your character will do it. You have to literally remember what the people have told you and pick it from an option. So be prepared for that.
That's cool.
I know I've danced around the story as a whole, but maybe Jesse, you can talk about like the tone of the story as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a lot of ways it's a classic revenge tale. I think the more interesting bits of the story come from how Naoe and Yasuke interact with one another, and how both of their origin points are drastically different, but they come together for this sort of common idea of, we need to take down the Shinbakufu. Am I saying that correctly?
Close enough.
I don't know. These 12 assassins, essentially, that they both have beef with. They both have an axe to grind with this group for separate reasons. And I think it mostly works. I think whenever you have 12 people you have to take down, the story is naturally going to have some pacing issues. It's naturally going to drag a little bit here and there. But when you get to the climactic moments, the assassinations of these characters themselves, like, that's where that game really shines. And I think the cinematic set pieces that they craft around those, I specifically think of one of the late game ones where the game has you constantly switching between Naoe and Yasuke, and you're doing this castle siege and you're doing all this other stuff. It reminds me like, oh, I really like these two characters, and I like when they're together. I think when the game has them apart for so long, it kind of wears on you a little bit. But I think overall the story is pretty good. I think what the game tries to do post story is better, in my opinion, than what they did in the main sort of narrative structure. But it does feel like two different ideas that they had for a story, that they were like, oh, we got this other one. We'll just throw it in towards the end. But that one to me is the more interesting one. And I won't get into it for spoiler reasons, but this game does sort of have like two different ideas going on at the same time. And one of them doesn't really happen until the very, very, very like post main story, post a bunch of other stuff.
Wow.
And I'm like, I wish you put this more front and center.
What's probably telling is that a lot of the stuff we talked about with the main story is about the set pieces it gets you to do, rather than like the narrative of what's going on. Each main mission is like its own little set piece of like the setup. It'll be about like raising allies to do an assault on a castle, or getting the right equipment in order to be able to like infiltrate this tea ceremony under the guise of someone else. They're all little ideas like that, and they're some of the most interesting experimental things from a gameplay perspective. But I wouldn't say like I necessarily cared about the characters. Like you said, Jesse, there's like 12 main villains. So you don't particularly remember who any of them are from when you're introduced to them at the beginning of the game. So you don't have that kind of like emotional attachment to much of the enemies, but they're an excuse to craft little cool set pieces.
Yeah, and they're also masked villains, so you don't even really have any sort of attachment to them. But I will say that I think the game does some interesting things with when you finally learn identities of who these people are. Both, I think they subvert expectations, but they also have some fun just moments of like when the characters understand who this person is and how they tie into the grander region. So I think the game tries to keep that going as best as it can, but it is very hard to care about the 8 side characters that are only tied to this one assassination mission that you probably won't see half of them again throughout the game. It's just a lot of starting and stopping. It's like, oh, I can finish an assassination mission. Let me move on to the next one. Okay, we're starting back at square one. Let's bring it back. You're coming off the high of that last mission, but we're gonna reel it back now, bring it back down to the ground. And that can get
as if they expect you to take a break in between the missions and
kind of
press. Yeah,
it does feel like its own natural like arc concluded, and then you're about to start the next one.
You don't even have to do like one of the main targets all in one go. They're split into like 4 like sub goals, and you can just do one of them and then leave and come back later. But I did just want to say that I agreed with you, Jesse, on Naue and Yasuke's interactions being some of the highlights. I really liked the conversations they have are quite rare because you're playing one or the other. But when they are on screen together, they're often quite funny. Like some of the dialogue they have together is very sweet, like Naue teasing Yasuke about being attracted to someone, or like little touches that I was like, they argue as well. Like they're not always in alignment, but those little moments, I would have loved to see a little bit more of that.
There is also something fun about when they're having a conversation and you get to pick both dialogue options.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, I've never had a conversation in a game where I control both of the outcomes. So that was a nice little thing.
Well, we covered the spectrum here. I think maybe what's missing is like overall now, a couple days out from having completed it, how do you feel about the game? Are you willing to give a score on this podcast, or should we tease the website? I'll leave that to you guys.
Yeah, that's what I was interested to. You can come after me. Yeah, I won't give a score on here, but I'll say that for my sensibilities, I really liked it. Like I was surprised by how much I liked Shadows. Like I've bounced off Assassin's Creed games in the past, and I really connected with this one. There are like noticeable things wrong with it, like lots of things that just pop up, little things that pop up when you're going through it, where you're like, oh, that's a bit annoying, or that feels a bit weird. But the world to me justified it. Like I just enjoyed traveling through it, like going to different cities, and that was like worth the experience. And I'm like I said, I'm keen to go play more. And like when you're racing through a 50-hour game for review, if you still want to play more of it afterwards, that's a good sign.
I feel like I have a lot of conflicted opinions on it because I think the things I love about it are its world. I like how pretty this game is. I don't necessarily love playing the video game, like the core gameplay of it. I think the combat's kind of floaty. I think I think the horse is a nightmare to control. I know we didn't talk about it. The horse is a nightmare to control. Yeah, like Henry said, it's a lot of little things that pop up here and there. Since I'm not reviewing it, and I don't know what scoring metric we're using on this podcast, I'd say I'd probably give it like a 7.58 out of 10 if that's the range we're going.
It feels like the game.
There's a lot there that pulls it away.
It's definitely one of those ones where it's like you'll know if it's the right kind of game for you, right? Like it wants you to sort of take your time and explore. And if you're going to get frustrated or bored by that, you're really probably going to bounce off it.
It's the kind of game that at hour 10, you're going to be doing the same things at hour 50 that you were doing at hour 10, variations on a theme. But if you have seen a lot of that game by hour 10, and if you're like, none of this has landed for me, hour 50 is not going to change that. You'll know pretty early whether or not this is your jam or not.
Do you think you'll play the next Assassin's Creed is maybe the best last question?
ideally not for review, because man, reviewing these massive games is exhausting.
Yeah,
But
it's tough.
I'd like to say yes, but it really depends on the approach I feel like we see them take with it. The way that they want you to play this game feels targeted towards the setting of feudal Japan. Like there's a lot of like taking things slow, stopping for meditation, like doing kata with Yasuke. Like a lot of that and the way I wanted to play the game fit the setting. But if you put all of those systems in another setting, I don't know if I would like click with it as well. I feel like you need to make adjustments to justify a new setting, and that's always kind of been the concern, isn't it, with Ubisoft's open world, is whether or not they're going to do that. I hope they will, and if they do, then yes.
Yeah, I think it's wholly dependent on setting for me. I think it really just depends on where they go next. I don't think they have done anything gameplay wise to dissuade me from wanting to play another Assassin's Creed. I think it's just is the setting going to interest me? Because if you have, like Henry said, molded sort of the activities to the region that they are exploring, yeah, well, I'll sign up for another. Maybe in like a year or two. Like, don't give me one anytime soon. But yeah.
What's
play
the
another one.
wish list? What is the setting?
Ooh,
wish
that's a
list?
good question.
Oh man, Jesse, you got any ideas off the bat? I can go.
I've always kind of wanted a modern day Assassin's Creed, but that's like a different thing entirely. What do you got, Henry?
I'm a sucker for ancient civilizations. So, I mean, I can just give you a bunch. Sumerian, we know not as much about it. That's one of the oldest. I'd love to see them like go really far into the past. Set in the Americas, you could do a Mayan one, something like that. Very different kind of setting. Again, needs to justify it with the systems and mechanics. Those would probably be my top picks, I think. They'll probably want to steer clear of something like, like Mongolian Empire, because Ghost of Tsushima's touched on that, and that's probably something they won't want to overlap with, although it would be nice to see it from the perspective of that empire.
I think that covers it for Assassin's Creed Shadows and the first episode of the Restart podcast. Henry, Jesse, do you want to offer some plugs? Your X handles? Is that what people say now? X handles? No one says Twitter anymore.
I'm on
we
Blue
say Blue
Sky, baby.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm at Mama Vitelli on Blue Sky. You can follow me there. You can find all my work and all my other stuff there.
Jesse's very funny. Follow Jesse.
Thank you. Henry,
I'm mostly post about food. If you want to see pictures of my photo mode on Assassin's Creed, you can follow me, because that's what I'll be doing. But
Henry's got some good photos. So Henry sent them to me. They're real good.
Thanks, everyone. This has been our review of Assassin's Creed Shadows. For more, you can head over to restart.run. And by the time you're listening to this, the review should be live. I imagine it'll be high on the page there somewhere. And great. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Jesse.
awesome. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.